Here's the translated story with American names and locations. I never imagined my life would take such a drastic turn. For years, I had led a quiet and routine existence with my husband, Jack. We met in college and had been inseparable ever since. He was my rock, my constant, the man I had dreamed of starting a family with. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was solid and full of love. I worked as a teacher at a local elementary school, while Jack worked as an accountant for a small company. We lived in a modest apartment in the suburbs, saving every penny to someday buy our own house. Our weekends consisted of home-cooked dinners, movie marathons, and walks in the park. It was a simple life, but I felt happy and fulfilled. Everything changed the day I met Alexander Wolf. It was at a charity gala organized by the school where I work. Normally, I didn't attend such events, but one of my colleagues fell ill at the last minute and I was asked to replace her. I put on my best dress, a black one I saved for special occasions, and headed to the luxurious hotel where the gala was being held. From the moment I entered the ballroom, I felt out of place. The atmosphere was filled with rich and powerful people, businessmen and local celebrities donating large sums of money to the cause. I was just an elementary school teacher in a sea of diamonds and designer suits. That's when I saw him for the first time. Alexander Wolf, the famous millionaire and philanthropist, was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by a group of admirers. Tall, with dark hair and piercing eyes, he radiated an aura of power and confidence that took my breath away. Our eyes met for an instant, and I felt as if an electric current ran through my body. I tried to ignore that feeling and focused on my task for the night. Securing donations for the school, I approached several groups, timidly introducing myself and explaining the importance of our cause. I got some promises of modest donations, but nothing significant. I was about to give up when I felt a presence behind me. I turned around and found myself face to face with Alexander Wolf. Up close, he was even more impressive. His tailored suit highlighted his athletic physique, and his green eyes shone intensely. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice you're collecting donations," he said in a deep, melodious voice. "Would you mind telling me more about your cause?" I stuttered at first, intimidated by his presence, but soon found my voice and began to speak passionately about the school and the children I taught. To my surprise, Alexander listened with genuine interest, asking insightful questions and showing a deep understanding of the challenges facing public education. At the end of our conversation, Alexander took out his checkbook and wrote a figure that left me speechless. It was more money than the school had raised in years. "I hope this helps," he said with a charming smile, "and I'd like to stay in touch to see how these funds are used. Could we exchange numbers?" Stunned by his generosity and charisma, I accepted without thinking twice. We exchanged cards, and before I could properly thank him, Alexander was called away by another group of guests. That night, I returned home in a dreamlike state. I told Jack about the donation, omitting the details of my encounter with Alexander. My husband was excited about the success of the gala, but I couldn't help noticing a shadow of concern in his eyes when I mentioned Alexander Wolf's name. "Be careful with that guy," he warned me. "I've heard stories about him. They say he's charming but also dangerous." I tried to downplay his words, but a part of me knew Jack was right. There was something about Alexander that both attracted and frightened me. The following days passed normally, but I couldn't get Alexander out of my mind. I found myself constantly checking my phone, waiting for a message from him. I felt guilty about these thoughts, reminding myself that I was happily married. A week after the gala, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was Alexander, inviting me for coffee to discuss how the donated funds would be used. I knew I should politely decline, but something inside me pushed me to accept. We met at an elegant cafe downtown. Alexander arrived dressed casually, but still looked impeccable. I felt conscious of my simple appearance, but he immediately made me feel comfortable with his easy conversation and warm smile. What was supposed to be a brief business meeting turned into hours of conversation. We talked about our lives, our dreams, and our passions. Alexander told me about his difficult childhood and how he had built his empire. From scratch, I told him about my love for teaching and my hopes for the future. When I finally looked at my watch, I realized I had spent the entire afternoon with him. I said goodbye hastily, feeling guilty for having lost track of time. "I'd like to see you again," Alexander said as I stood up. "There's a new restaurant I want to try. Would you like to join me?" I knew I should say no. I was playing with fire and I knew it, but the words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. I'd love to. Thus began my double life. On one side was my everyday existence with Jack, quiet dinners, movie nights, and conversations about our future together. On the other side were my secret meetings with Alexander, dinners at exclusive restaurants, rides on his private yacht, and conversations that made me feel more alive than ever. I tried to justify my actions by telling myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. Alexander and I were just friends after all. But deep down, I knew I was lying. The way my heart raced when I was near him, the electricity I felt when our hands accidentally brushed all of that, told me my feelings went far beyond friendship. Weeks turned into months, and it became increasingly difficult to keep my two lives separate. Jack began to notice changes in my behavior. I was more distant, more distracted. Sometimes I would stay up all night, tormented by guilt and desire. One night, after a particularly tense dinner with Jack, I received a message from Alexander. He was inviting me to spend the weekend at his beach house. I knew I should say no, but the temptation was too strong. I told Jack I was going to a teacher's retreat. The lie left a bitter taste in my mouth, but the excitement of what was to come overshadowed my guilt. The weekend with Alexander was like a dream. His beach house was a private paradise, with ocean views and all the amenities one could imagine. I felt like a princess in a fairy tale. It was during that getaway that I finally crossed the line. One night after a romantic candlelit dinner, Alexander kissed me, and I kissed him back. What followed was a night of unbridled passion, of desire that had been contained for months, finally being released. The next morning, I woke up with a mixture of euphoria and horror. I had cheated on my husband, the man who had loved me faithfully for years. What kind of person had I become? I returned home determined to end my relationship with Alexander, but when I saw Jack, so trusting and unaware of my betrayal, I couldn't muster the courage to confess the truth. Instead, I buried my guilt and continued living my double life. The following months were a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, there was the excitement and passion of my relationship with Alexander. He took me to places I had never dreamed of visiting, gave me jewelry and designer dresses, made me feel desired and appreciated in a way I had never experienced before. On the other hand, there was the constant weight of my guilt. Every time Jack hugged me or told me he loved me, I felt as if someone was stabbing me in the heart. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't find the strength to stop. My story isn't over yet. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you. Back to the story. It was then that Alexander made a proposal that would change everything. One night, as we were dining in his penthouse overlooking the city, he took my hand and looked into my eyes. "I want you to be with me," he said. "Completely. Leave your husband and come live with me. I'll give you everything you've ever dreamed of." I was left breathless. Part of me wanted to scream yes, abandon my previous life, and immerse myself completely in this world of luxury and passion. But another part, the part that still loved Jack and valued the vows we had made, resisted. "I can't," I finally said. "I love Jack. I can't just abandon him." Alexander looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and determination. "I understand," he said after a long silence. "But I want you to know that I'll do whatever it takes to have you, even if that means sharing you for now." Then he took an envelope out of his jacket and slid it towards me. "Inside is a check for $1 million, he said. "It's yours if you agree to keep seeing me regardless of what you decide to do with your marriage." I looked at the envelope, stunned. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It could pay off all our debts, buy the house Jack and I had always dreamed of, secure our financial future. But the cost was high. Accepting that money would mean committing to continue cheating on my husband, to living a lie. Could I live with myself if I made that decision? The following weeks were emotional hell. I couldn't sleep, barely ate. Jack noticed something was wrong, but attributed my behavior to work stress. He had no idea of the battle raging inside me. Finally, I made a decision. One night, after Jack had gone to bed, I took out the envelope Alexander had given me. With trembling hands, I signed the check and deposited it into our joint account. The next day, I told Jack that I had won a prize in a writing contest. His face lit up with joy and pride, and I felt as if my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. From that moment on, my life became an emotional roller coaster. On one hand, I enjoyed the luxuries that Alexander's money provided. We bought our dream house, went on vacation to exotic places, lived without financial worries. Jack was happy and grateful, unaware of the real price of our new life. On the other hand, guilt was consuming me. Every night, when I lay down next to Jack, I felt I didn't deserve his love and trust. Every time I met with Alexander, a part of me hated myself for what I was doing. Things got even more complicated when Alexander began pressuring me to leave Jack. He was no longer content with furtive encounters and stolen weekends. He wanted me to be his completely. "I love you," he told me one night while we were in a luxury hotel suite. "I want us to be together, without secrets, without lies. Leave Jack and marry me." His words left me breathless. Part of me wanted to scream yes, abandon the farce my marriage had become and start anew with Alexander. But another part, the part that still loved Jack and valued the life we had built together, resisted. "I can't." I finally said, "I'm sorry, Alexander, but I can't leave Jack." Alexander's expression changed in an instant. The tenderness in his eyes was replaced by a coldness I had never seen before. "I think you forget who I am," he said in a controlled voice. "I can give you everything you want, but I can also take it all away." His words chilled my blood. For the first time, I saw Alexander's dark side, the ruthless man hiding. Behind the charm and generosity, the following days were torment. Alexander began calling me constantly, sending threatening messages. He told me that if I didn't leave Jack, he would tell him everything, that he would destroy my marriage, my career, my entire life. I felt trapped, with no way out. I couldn't tell Jack the truth without destroying our marriage, but I also couldn't continue living under Alexander's threats. It was then that I made the most difficult decision of my life. One night, after Jack had gone to bed, I started writing. I wrote everything: my affair with Alexander, the money I had accepted, the lies I had told. I wrote about my love for Jack and how much I regretted betraying him. When I finished, I left the letter on the kitchen table and left the house with a small suitcase. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to get away, think, find a way to fix the mess my life had become. I drove for hours, aimlessly, with tears blurring my vision. Finally, I stopped at a small motel on the outskirts of the city. I spent the night awake, tormented by my decisions and wondering what Jack would be thinking as he read my confession. The next morning, my phone was full of missed calls and messages. Most were from Jack, begging me to come home so we could talk. There were some from Alexander, alternating between threats and desperate pleas. With a heavy heart, I decided to face the consequences of my actions. I returned home, prepared for the worst. To my surprise, Jack was waiting for me at the door. His eyes were red and swollen. It was evident he had spent the night crying. "Why?" was all he could say when he saw me. We went into the house and sat in the living room for hours. We talked. I told him everything, every sordid detail of my affair with Alexander, every lie I had told Jack. Listened in silence, his face a mask of pain and disappointment. When I finished, I waited for his anger, his rejection. Instead, Jack surprised me once again. I love you, he said in a broken voice. What you did hurts me more than I can express, but I still love you. And if you're willing to fight for our marriage, so am I. His words left me breathless. I didn't deserve his forgiveness, his love. But at that moment, I knew I would do anything to earn his trust back. The following days were difficult. Jack and I agreed to go to couples therapy, work on our communication, and rebuild our relationship from scratch. We also made the difficult decision to return the money Alexander had given me. We sold our dream house and moved back to our modest apartment. Alexander didn't take my decision well. He tried to threaten me, blackmail me. He even tried to contact Jack directly. But with my husband's support, I found the strength to confront him. It's over, I told him in our last conversation. What we had was a mistake, and I never want to see you again. To my surprise, Alexander finally backed off. Maybe he realized he had lost, or perhaps something in my determination convinced him it was useless to keep insisting. The following months were a slow and painful healing process. There were times when I thought our marriage wouldn't survive, moments when guilt and remorse threatened to consume me. But Jack was by my side every step of the way, showing me a strength and love I didn't know he possessed. Little by little, we began to rebuild our relationship. We learned to communicate better, to be honest about our feelings and needs. We rediscovered the love that had united us in the first place and strengthened it with a new appreciation for what we had almost lost. A year after my confession, Jack and I renewed our vows in an intimate ceremony with our closest friends and family. As I looked into the eyes of the man who had chosen to forgive me and love me despite my mistakes, I knew I had made the right decision. The temptation of luxury and excitement that Alexander had offered paled in comparison to the depth and authenticity of the love I shared with Jack. I had learned the hard way that the true value of a relationship isn't measured in dollars or expensive gifts, but in the strength of commitment and the capacity to forgive. My affair with Alexander had taken me to the brink of the abyss, had made me question everything I believed about myself and about love. But it had also taught me invaluable lessons about honesty, loyalty, and the true meaning of happiness. As Jack and I began this new chapter of our lives, I knew the road wouldn't be easy. Trust would take time to rebuild completely, and there would be days when the memories of my betrayal would come back to haunt us. But I was determined to prove to Jack and to myself that our love was stronger than my past mistakes. I looked to the future with a mixture of hope and humility. I was no longer the naive woman who had been dazzled by the glitter of money and power. I was a woman who had faced her demons, who had hit rock bottom and found the strength to rise again. The memory of Alexander and what I had almost lost due to my weakness would always be with me, like a scar on my soul, but also as a constant reminder of what really matters in life: true love, honesty, and integrity. As Jack and I left the small chapel where we had renewed our vows, hand in hand and with genuine smiles on our faces, I knew I had found something much more valuable than all the millions Alexander could have offered me. I had found forgiveness, redemption, and a second chance to do things right, and this time I had no intention of wasting it. End of story.